So far in our model, the mindfulness-based InterSpiritual model, where we have 3 practice chairs: mindfulness chair, meditation chair, and inside our contemplation chair. We've put them into we've named 3 distinct categories. First category is for personal development. The second category is for spiritual. And the third category then is either a tradition, a philosophy, a belief system, or a religious category. And at the moment, we're exploring particularly the second category, which is the spiritual one. What does it mean to be spiritual, first of all? And more specifically, what does it mean to be interspiritual? So for me, I went and studied a number of the traditions and the religions and various philosophies, not just studied, but the practice side of them. And particularly in the more contemplative, meditative practices side, the mystical sides, and so on, to see what they offered. But more in particular, what commonality they had, what they had in common. And that's what I was struck by. I mean, initially I was just there to see what they offered and to experience the different practices and teachings, whether it was Buddhist or Christian contemplative or Jungian or shamanistic from South America, spiritualism, you name it, doesn't matter. I wanted to practice, to experience, to see where it brought me in my development. But all of a sudden I began to realize, hold on a minute, there's a common theme, themes began to arise. And I noticed that there was a lot of the practices were very similar. When you take away the language of the tradition, although some people would find that quite abusive, but when you take away the language of the tradition or the philosophy, the practices themselves were quite similar. And so I began to think, right, okay, well, what is this context then that's arising by itself? And I liked the phrase interspiritual by Wayne Teasdale and other people who have come up with this phrase, because rather than interfaith, because interfaith for me is still about belief systems and, trying to sort of bring belief systems together and find common ground, which is fine. But for me, the spiritual domain that was arising was very much about practice rather than belief. Although, beliefs support the practice. But often, I think in today's culture, we're looking for it the other way around. We want the practice to then inform our beliefs, and maybe vice versa. So this interspiritual domain arose through my own journey and experience. Thanks, Wayne, for that, and for that word. And for me, interspiritual is it's a common ground of practice. It's a common ground of practice or practices which bring people on an inner journey. And that inner journey is very defined by the second model that I use in my teaching, called the inner process model, where we have 4 basic steps in that inner spiritual journey. So we work on the story, the persona, then we move back into the observing awareness of ourselves, and we develop that through mindfulness and so on. We move further back and start engaging with some of the pain body, the shadow work we need to do to heal and grow as human beings. And ultimately, we connect them to our authentic self or oneness right at the back of the psyche. And that's a very brief summary of quite an in-depth teaching. So this interspiritual domain then um, is one that I'm constantly exploring and offering to students. And one of the language changes when we enter into what I call interspiritual space. So, we're not using necessarily the language of the head, which is the thinking mind. We've got the language of the feeling, the heart, the feeling mind, and also the gut, the doing gut. And I like to think that in order to really enter into interspiritual space, because it is a practice space, we have to be able to calm the mind, to calm the heart, the emotional body, to calm the gut, the drives, the energy, the body, the instinct. And only then can we begin to move into spiritual intelligence or the spiritual context. And as we do so, we begin to develop an awareness of ourselves as an energetic awareness. And for me, that is the entry point to the real spiritual domain. Sure, we can go into the head and say it's all about meaning making and connecting to others. Go into the heart and say it's all about compassion and loving kindness. Go into the gut and say it's about doing goodwill, good deeds and service in the world. Fine. But I'm being specific now in saying that this other domain that we call the interspiritual domain is in actual fact a combination of it impacts the thinking, the feeling, and the doing, the body, but it is beyond that. And what happens in the practice is, as I begin to practice, I mean, a lot of the different well-known, say, Christian mystics would have mentioned, say, for example, Meister Eckhart talks about detachment. In psychosynthesis, we see it. They do a lot of exercise on the difference between attachment, detachment, as opposed to disassociation, which is a form of escapism. And that's, you could see how that's played out historically in different traditions over the years, how important or not important the body is, and how people can get confused often around those the body and not the body, and so on. So, but coming back to the central point, that as I enter into the interspiritual context, I'm developing an awareness of myself, not just as a physical being, but which is quite literal and physical and scientifically tested, but more importantly, an energetic awareness of myself. Now, how does that arise? In the practice, in the mindfulness practice, I'm constantly looking to develop the observer of myself. I step back from my thinking mind and I observe my thoughts. I step back from my feelings and I observe them, and so on. At a very basic level, this is a form of detachment. And this detachment, the Buddhists talk a lot about it in their not naming sort of practices. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not my story, I'm not my thoughts. Who am I then? And really what they're pointing towards is an appreciation and an experience of myself as the awareness of. I am the awareness of myself. I am the awareness of my thoughts. I am the awareness, the observer, the witness, as Eckhart Tolle would say in his books. And that awareness is my energetic identity. My energetic identity. So we are now shifting identities, or perhaps more clearly or more correctly to say, I am expanding my sense of identity from being a physical separate being into an energetic being as well as a physical being, and both. And this energetic being, maybe another way Eckhart Tolle languages it, he would say, well, if you feel the aliveness in yourself, in your body, as opposed to the sensations, is there an aliveness there? And that aliveness then is connected to the aliveness all around us. In the Taoist system, they talk about qi, my qi, the energy. The whole Chinese medicine is based on qi, And so lots of different traditions, some are more au fait with an energetic awareness of ourselves. But I think particularly in Western society, we had lost that for a number of years. And now it's coming back. And it's coming back in interesting ways because if you like, the whole spiritual domain is a domain that, and particularly because of its nature, different traditions say, well, that belongs to me. So, for example, the Catholic Church says the spiritual domain belongs to us. The Muslims would say the spiritual domain belongs to us. Other people say the spiritual domain belongs to us. It doesn't belong to anybody. So, one of the things we discuss in my program is you can have a high religious quotient or intelligence within a tradition. So you can be very theologically sound. You can know your stuff inside out in relation to the tradition. You can be practicing it all. But it may or may not have a high spiritual quotient. So if your religious tradition is introducing you to the awareness of yourself as an energetic being that's connected to oneness or to everything, whatever language the tradition uses, then it's doing its job. But if it's not, then it's not doing its job. So there are lots of people out there practicing who could quote, say, for example, in the Jewish tradition, they can quote the teachings inside out, but they have a low spiritual intelligence because they're not practicing the deeper practices to bring them into energetic awareness. So when we enter into this domain, the InterSpiritual Domain that I call it, we become, through practice, we become aware of ourselves as an energetic being. And that opens a doorway into a whole other context and language. A whole other context and language. Initially, people have experiences that they call spiritual experiences, awakening experiences, psychic phenomena, and so on, where, the door opens and then closes again. And they can be quite frightening for some people. For others, they can be a taste of what they're looking for. For many people, they're assisted by drugs or various other methodologies which aren't necessarily helpful. But ultimately, for me, the spiritual domain, knowing myself as this energetic being, isn't so much about spiritual experiences or awakening moments or psychic phenomena, even though they're exciting and often interesting, sometimes scary because they're healing based. But what's more important is within the contemplation is that sense that it brings to myself as to my identity. So as an energetic being, I begin to connect, because my energy field is connected to everything, and to the Earth's energy field, to humanity, to oneness. If you're a Christian, to God. and that is God. I mean, it's not to separate. So, so what I love about that is, for me, in my practice, then, when I enter into this interspiritual context, is am I opening am I shifting my awareness from the physical to the energetic, and through that, then to oneness. And as I connect into oneness, then my whole identity changes right back into the ground of my being. And that feeling of connectedness then can, I would probably need a couple of videos to describe what domain presents and arises out of that. I think the word that I like to use is illumination. I love that word. I love the word illuminated. I become, because it's an energy word, it's a light consciousness word, we become illuminated from the inside out. So my energetic self is now illuminated and energized through my connection to oneness, and in that process, then comes great energy and creativity and natural outpouring of compassion for others, a wanting to be of service in the world. And this is what all the mystics describe. This is the place. Whether you're religious, you consider yourself religious or non-religious. For me, it doesn't matter. Because this is an interspiritual domain. So I hope I'm not treading on anybody's toes there by saying that. But at the same time, that's my experience, looking at all these different traditions and philosophies and practices from around the world. And all of a sudden, there are commonalities. So this interspiritual domain is a very exciting place, I think, for people in the world today. And what's happening is, and I know, in my own, some of my own communities I link in with, and people, people that I associate with in different ways, they are all aware of themselves as an energetic, not just a physical being. That is the distinction. That is a huge distinction, but that is the distinction. And then how I live through this awareness, this new awareness, impacts my physical life all the time, relationally, in how I am. I mean, it gives me a whole layer of intelligence that I didn't have before, and awareness. So, when I'm connecting into the spiritual domain, I'm listening, and I'm discerning. I'm listening all the time for that deeper connection, and ultimately the deeper love that's there. Because it is love. It's love. And to feel that love in every cell of your being is the ultimate state of aliveness. The ultimate state of aliveness. It's healing. It's transcendent. It doesn't require you to be anybody, to fix anything. It just requires, all it wants is the connection. So we're opening the doorways into the interspiritual domain energetically. And as we do that, we connect into deep, deep love. Love as a state of being. A state of being. Very similar to a state of meditation. Love. It's here. Oh, it's always here. It's always here. Love as a state of being is always here. And in that great love, we say G for great, big G for God, for great. The Buddhists say noble, big N, noble love, noble silence or stillness. So in that great love, then I'm plugged in. If I use a technical term, I'm plugged in. And so a lot of my practices are about learning to plug in. How do I plug in to this interspiritual context? And once I'm plugged in, I can receive the energy, the awareness, the insight, the guidance, the teaching that I need to continue to flourish and to be resilient and of service in the world. Because that energy and those teachings and the insight and the guidance that we all look for and need is already here, right now. I just need to plug into it. I just need to plug myself into it through the deeper practice of mindfulness-based interspirituality. And once I plug into it, then everything changes. Everything changes. I become illuminated. And this illumination is a light. It's the light of consciousness. My consciousness arises. It expands. It connects. I'm no longer so attached then to my identity of myself as the story, the ego-based physical story. That's always looking for attachment through form, you know. So that's why, and the irony is, of course, the more freer I become, the more detached I become, not disassociated, but the more detached I become from form, the freer I am to enjoy form, to enjoy being human. And that's the irony of the spiritual process. The deeper we go into the process, the more human we can become. I think that's a great sign of the process. We become very human in all our messiness and our brokenness and our shame and our embarrassments and mistakes and fragilities and so on. I can even celebrate those in a very humble way. So I'm very excited today and interested in this interspiritual context. The language changes. So in spirituality, we might say, I discern. Rather than I'm thinking or feeling or doing or whatever, I'm discerning right now what the best course of action to take is. So that's very much sitting in a contemplative chair, listening into greater awareness, energetically listening into greater awareness, and then waiting and holding a space energetically, waiting for the response. And there's always a response. That's one of the things I've come to appreciate in my life. When I pray for something, when I set an intention for something, when I listen and ask for help, at that deeper level, there is always a response. So I'm discerning. That's the verb. But more importantly, before I discern, or have the ability to discern, I'm connecting into and allowing myself to be illuminated. And that's a form of grace in the Christian contemplation. It's a form of grace to be illuminated from the inside out and connecting. And then there was some questions people ask me sometimes about awakening experiences or psychic phenomena or abilities and so on. And as I said earlier, they're great. They can be exciting. They can be scary, though, if you're not familiar with them. They're not so important, though. What's more important is the connection, connecting into the source of oneness of everything. That's the important part. But when I start to identify as an energetic awareness, as who I am, to have this awareness, then other faculties come with that. They come with that, you know. So energetically, I'm connected, not just emotionally or mentally or physically, whatever. Energetically, spiritually, you could say, interchanging those two words, I'm connected to all my family and friends. So, you know, for example, if there's a problem with one of my children or my wife or someone in my family, I can sense that. I can sense it energetically. Or other people have different experiences. Oftentimes, an inner awareness presents as an external phenomenon. But if you're not aware that this is an inner awareness, then it can be a little frightening, you know. And of course, then, you know, this is where people begin to see energy, to sense energy all around them. And of course, and then even at a higher level to be able to sense beings, to be able to sense spirits, to be able to sense people who have maybe died and so on, our spiritual guides, and all. There are lots of different levels within that. Some people, however, like if you study spiritualism in the UK or the US, some people can develop a faculty for sensing the energetic, which is the same faculty that arises when you do this inner journey naturally, if you're doing it right. But they may or may not develop spiritually. So that's a different thing, you know. So I won't say any more about that. It's quite self-evident. But so for me, the exciting, I suppose, point, and you know, the language, as I said, changed. So for example, oftentimes I would say when I'm sitting in the contemplative chair and I'm listening in for deeper guidance or awareness or wisdom, you know, I would say, and then I get an insight, I would say, oh, I'm having a download. That's what I say to my wife. It's a computer term. I'm having a download today. I really have to get that out, you know. So in the past, though, and to a large degree, even today, we don't understand the interspiritual domain that I'm referencing today. We don't understand it enough. Now, quantum physics does, on one hand, but that's so far removed from humanity's, you know, in terms of spiritual development, but yet it describes the same domain. But we don't understand it enough, so we're afraid of it. We're afraid of it to a large degree, you know. Or we label people, we say, oh, well, they're just New Age practitioners. New Age practitioners. I love that. You know, but these are people who are recognizing themselves that they are energetic beings. They are recognizing it. That's what these people are. So you call them whatever you want, but at least they're recognizing it, and they're finding ways of celebrating and practicing and developing this side of their identity, through community, through dance, through all sorts of healing modalities, you name it, because they can feel, they can sense, they now have a knowing that they maybe didn't have before, although for many people it was always there, that they are this energetic being as well as a human, as part of the human experience. And I would say to any of the practitioners of, say, some of the religious traditions, that's what's missing. People always ask me, where's all the young people? Why don't they come to the church? Why don't they celebrate and so on? That's what the young people are doing right now. They're exploring themselves as energetic beings, and that's what they're doing. If they're on any sort of spiritual journey, that's what the young people are doing. So if you offer that in your tradition or your church, a way of doing that, then the young people will come, because that's the next wave of evolution. That's the next wave of consciousness that's coming to the planet now. That's what's coming now. So if you're still stuck, or if you're still, trying to experience the spiritual or interspiritual domain through the physical or through the head or just the heart and the gut, it's not enough. It's not. You're missing out on the whole point. The whole point of it. So I think that would be a really exciting and interesting space to explore within a tradition, whether that's the Christian tradition or a Muslim one or a Jewish one or whatever. Where do we, where's the energetic development of the person? A lot of it's tied up in ritual, and I think a lot of the richness and the awareness has been lost. It's been lost, but it's there. It's there. I mean, it's there, obviously. Okay. Thank you for listening. Always love sharing, and yeah, have a good day.